Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are staring at a map, but I want you to completely forget the map you remember from, high school geography class. You know the cliche I'm talking about, the one about Turkey.
Oh, I know the one. Turkey as the bridge.
Exactly. The bridge between East and West. The meeting point of civilizations. Where the Orient meets the Occident. We have heard it 1,000 times. It's comforting, it's poetic, and according to our source material today, it is completely wrong.
It's not just wrong, it's obsolete. If we look at Erdogan's Empire by Soner Cagaptay, which is our guide for this deep dive, that whole metaphor is dead. In fact, the current leadership in Ankara isn't trying to maintain the bridge. They are essentially trying to blow it up.
That is a pretty violent image to start with. So if they aren't a bridge, which implies something passive, something people just, walk over, what are they trying to be?
They are building an engine, a fortress, a standalone power. The mission today is to unpack this massive transformation. We are looking at how President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has effectively dismantled the secular, Europe-facing republic founded by Ataturk to build what he calls a new Turkey.
A new Turkey.
And this isn't a country that wants to be a walkway for other civilizations. It wants to be the center of gravity itself.
And that requires a completely different mindset. It's a shift from being a passive ally on the edge of Europe to an assertive power looking south and east. It's a story about imperial nostalgia, military muscle, and a very dangerous balancing act between superpowers.
Right. And to understand this new map, we have to start with the architect. Before Erdogan could change the borders, figuratively speaking, he had to change the philosophy. And that brings us to a name that dominates the early chapters of Cagaptay's book, Ahmet Davutoglu.
Okay, so who is Davutoglu? Because usually we just hear about Erdogan.
Davutoglu is the intellectual grandfather of this whole project. He was Erdogan's foreign policy advisor, then foreign minister, and eventually prime minister. In the early 2000s, he wrote a book called Strategic Depth. And honestly, you can't understand modern Turkey without understanding that title.
Strategic Depth. It sounds a bit like a submarine movie, but I assume it's geopolitical.
Very much so. The core argument was that for decades, the Turkish Republic had been punching below its weight. Davutoglu argued that Turkey had been acting like a simple buffer state on the flank of NATO, just a wall to stop the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
But he looked at the map and saw something else. He saw the Ottoman history.
He saw the ghosts of the empire.
Exactly. He argued that Turkey possesses strategic depth because of that Ottoman legacy. It has historical leverage in the Balkans, in the Middle East, in the Caucasus. He said Turkey shouldn't be begging to join the European club. It should be the central hub of its own sphere of influence.
And this gave birth to that famous slogan, right? Zero problems with
neighbors. That was the golden rule.
Which, looking at the news today, it sounds almost like a dark joke. Turkey seems to have problems with almost everyone.
It does now, but we have to give them credit. Back in the early 2000s, it was working. The economy was booming, and the strategy was all about soft power.
So what did that actually look like? Turkish soft power?
It looked like trade deals. It looked like visa-free travel. It looked like Turkish soap operas becoming these massive hits in Cairo and Baghdad. They were exporting culture and commerce, not soldiers. They even floated the idea of a Schengen zone.
Schengen? Like a play on the European Schengen zone.
Precisely. Sham is the classic Arabic term for the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, that whole area. The idea was a borderless trade and travel zone involving Turkey, Syria, and others. It was Turkey acting as the benevolent big brother.
Using construction contracts and cultural affinity to rebuild that old sphere of influence.
Yes. Economy first, politics second.
It sounds almost utopian compared to what we have now.
Yeah.
So what killed the dream? Because zero problems clearly didn't last.
In a word, the Arab Spring killed it. That was the pivot point. When the uprisings began in 2011, Erdogan and Davutoglu saw a historic opportunity. They looked at Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, and they thought, this is it. The old secular dictators are falling.
And they bet on who would replace them.
They bet the house on the Muslim Brotherhood.
Which makes sense ideologically, right? Erdogan's AKP party is rooted in political Islam. They probably saw the Muslim Brotherhood as their ideological cousins.
Precisely. They thought they were riding the wave of history. They burned bridges with the old regimes like Assad in Syria, assuming they'd be replaced by friendly Islamist governments that would look to Ankara for leadership.
They thought they were about to become the leaders of a new, democratic, Islamist Middle East.
But the bet failed.
Utterly.
It failed spectacularly. The Muslim Brotherhood was ousted in Egypt, Tunisia remained unstable, and most disastrously, Bashar al-Assad survived in Syria.
So the friendly Islamist belt it never materialized.
No. And suddenly, zero problems with neighbors became what an advisor to Erdogan eventually called precious loneliness.
Precious loneliness. That is. Oh, wow, that is quite the spin. It sounds like something you tell yourself after a bad breakup.
It's a fascinating phrase, isn't it? It tries to frame their isolation as a moral stance. We are alone because we are the only ones with principles. But the geopolitical reality was that Turkey went from having friends everywhere to having almost no friends in the region.
Except for Qatar.
Except for Qatar. And this is where the strategy shifts, right? Because if soft power, the soap operas and the open borders doesn't work, you can't just pack up and go home.
No, you double down.
Correct. The soft power died. The era of hard power began. But before we get to the tanks and drones, we need to look at where Turkey failed. Cagaptay has this brilliant section in the book where he explains why Turkey is loved in some places and hated in others. He calls it the Eid Belt versus the Bayram Belt.
I love this part. It's a linguistic distinction,
Oh,
but it explains so much geopolitical friction. Break that down for us.
it's a great insight. So in the Muslim world, you have the major religious festivals. In Turkish, the word for this festival is Bayram, but in Arabic, it's Eid. Cagaptay uses this to distinguish between the regions where Turkey has cultural traction and where it encounters resistance.
So the Bayram Belt covers the places that use the Turkish word, or at least share that cultural nuance.
Right. That's the Balkans, the Caucasus, parts of Central Asia, think Bosnia, Albania, Macedonia. In these places, the Ottoman legacy is often viewed somewhat fondly, or at least with a sense of shared heritage, and Turkey has been surprisingly successful here.
How so?
They use state agencies to restore old Ottoman bridges and mosques. It's cultural diplomacy, and it works.
Because in the Balkans, the Ottomans are sometimes remembered as a counterbalance to other empires, or just a distant historical fact.
Exactly, but then you have the Eid Belt, the Arab world, and there the story is completely different.
Because the Arabs don't remember the Ottomans as benevolent big brothers.
No. In the Arab world, the memory of the Ottoman Empire is not about Bayram. It's often remembered as colonial oppression. The Ottomans ruled these lands for centuries. So when Erdogan tries to act like a Neo-Ottoman leader in Cairo or Riyadh, it doesn't look like leadership to them.
It looks like imperialism.
It looks like the Turks coming back to rule over the Arabs.
That is a massive blind spot. They thought they were liberators, but they were viewed as former colonial masters trying to make a comeback.
Exactly. So the soft power approach hit a brick wall in the Eid Belt, and because they couldn't charm the Middle East, they decided they had to project force instead. If they couldn't be loved, they would be feared.
And this leads us to the bases. The source material highlights this aggressive expansion. Turkey isn't just defending its borders anymore, it's setting up shop abroad.
It is a remarkable shift for a country that used to be very cautious. Look at the map today. Turkey established a military base in Qatar, which effectively protects the regime in Doha. They built a massive training base in Somalia, Camp Turksam, which gives them a foothold in the Horn of Africa.
And there was that deal in Sudan too, right? Swakan Island.
Swakan Island is huge strategically. It's right on the Red Sea. Historically, it was a key Ottoman port. By negotiating to reclaim it, ostensibly for tourism and restoration, Erdogan was signaling a return to the Red Sea. He was parking Turkey right in the backyard of Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Which connects to a concept that keeps coming up, the Blue Homeland, or Mavi Vatan.
Yes, Mavi Vatan. This is the maritime manifestation of this new independence. For decades, Turkey accepted the status quo in the Mediterranean. But the Blue Homeland Doctrine says that Turkey's power doesn't stop at the coastline. It claims vast areas of the eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea as Turkish economic zones.
It's about gas, isn't it?
It's about energy resources, yes. But it's also about psychology. It's an assertion that Turkey is a maritime power entitled to naval dominance, regardless of what Greece, Cyprus, or the EU says. Is Turkey saying, we draw our own map?
Okay, so we have Turkey pushing out into the Middle East, into Africa, into the Mediterranean, but we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Or rather, the bear.
Yeah.
Russian bear.
The apple and pear relationship.
That's what Cagaptay calls it. Right. What does that mean?
It's the most complex relationship in Erdogan's portfolio. The apple and pear strategy means you have to keep the trade, the apples, separate from the geopolitical fights, the pears, or the whole basket rots.
Because if you look at it logically, they should be at war. They're on opposite sides in Syria, Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh.
And yet Erdogan and Putin talk constantly. Why? Because of dependency. Turkey is economically married to Russia. Russia provides a huge chunk of Turkey's natural gas. Russia is building Turkey's first nuclear power plant. Erdogan knows he cannot afford a full rupture with Putin.
But historically, Turkey is terrified of Russia. That's the whole reason they joined NATO in the first place.
Correct. In 1952, Turkey joined NATO specifically because Stalin was demanding territory and control over the Turkish Straits. Fear of Russia is the primary driver of Turkey's Western alignment. But under Erdogan, that dynamic has shifted to what we call strategic hedging.
And Putin knows exactly how to play this. He seems to love driving a wedge between Turkey and NATO.
He is a master at it, and the masterpiece of this strategy was the S-400 missile system.
This is the part that still baffles people in Washington. I want to drill down on this. Turkey is a NATO member. Their entire air defense infrastructure is NATO compatible. And yet Erdogan decides to buy a Russian missile defense system, the S-400. Why?
It's the multi-billion-dollar question. The source suggests a few reasons. One is personal survival. Remember the failed coup attempt in 2016?
Right, where rogue elements of the Turkish military tried to overthrow Erdogan.
Erdogan felt that the West was hesitant to support him during those critical hours. He became deeply suspicious of the U.S. He also saw American support for Kurdish groups in Syria, the YPG, as a betrayal. He felt vulnerable.
So the S-400 wasn't just a weapon, it was insurance.
In a way, he wanted a defense system that wasn't controlled by the NATO chain of command, something he held the keys to. But the cost was astronomical. By buying the S-400, Turkey got kicked out of the F-35 fighter jet program.
And that's a huge deal. Turkey wasn't just buying the F-35, they were manufacturing parts for it.
They lost the most advanced fighter jet in the world for a Russian missile system that arguably they might never fully turn on because doing so would trigger even worse sanctions. From a NATO perspective, it looks like a massive cell phone.
But from Erdogan's perspective,
It's a declaration of independence. It says, we don't need American permission to defend our skies. It plays perfectly into that narrative of the standalone power.
speaking of standing alone, if you get kicked out of the F-35 program, you better have a backup plan. And Turkey's backup plan seems to be, we'll build it ourselves.
This is the drone revolution. And honestly, this is the one area where Erdogan's gamble has paid off significantly. Turkey has moved from being a net importer of weapons to a significant exporter. The Bayraktar TB2 drone is the crown jewel here.
These drones have become famous. We saw them in the headlines constantly over the last few years.
Because they change the nature of warfare in the region, they are relatively cheap, they are effective, and they are Turkish-made. The source material highlights how Turkey used these drones to stop the fall of Tripoli in Libya. They used them to help Azerbaijan reclaim territory in Nagorno-Karabakh.
This goes back to hard power.
Exactly. Turkey isn't just sending diplomats to conferences anymore. It's sending technology that wins wars. And crucially, they are doing it without asking the U.S. for permission. In the Cold War, Turkey needed NATO's blessing to move. Now, Erdogan wants a military-industrial complex that allows him to act like a 19th century great power.
It sounds incredibly ambitious, almost intoxicating. But here's where we have to look at the foundations. Because you can build all the drones you want, and you can draw lines on the Mediterranean map. But if your currency is crashing, you have a problem.
This is the Achilles heel of the entire imperial project, the clash between Neo-Ottoman dreams and economic reality.
Let's look at the identity aspect first. Because the new Turkey isn't just about drones, it's about symbols.
Oh, absolutely. Erdogan is physically reshaping the country to match his vision. Look at the Kamlika Mosque on the hill in Istanbul. It's massive. It dominates the skyline, overshadowing the secular monuments. He's using Ottoman palaces for government business.
He's overriding the secular Republic of Ataturk with something grander, more Islamic, more imperial.
But empires are expensive. They are. And Cagaptay makes a crucial point here. Turkey is a middle power with advanced power ambitions, but it lacks the one thing that allowed the Ottomans or the Russians or the Americans to project power indefinitely.
Resources.
Oil and gas. Turkey has almost none. It imports the vast majority of its energy. It needs cash to keep the lights on. And where does that money come from?
Well, historically, foreign investment.
Specifically, foreign direct investment from the strategic West, Europe and the United States, and this creates a trap.
I see where this is going. Erdogan bashes the West to rally his nativist base at home, complaining about European colonialists and American interference, which makes him popular. But then
the markets get spooked. The lira crashes, inflation skyrockets, and when the economy tanks, he has to pivot. He has to calm down the rhetoric to reassure the bankers in London and New York. He is caught in a cycle. To win votes, he needs to be anti-Western. To run the economy, he needs Western money.
It seems unsustainable. And the book mentions another cost, one that's less about money and more about people: the brain drain.
This is critical. You cannot build a great power if your brightest minds are buying one-way tickets to Berlin or Toronto. The authoritarian turn, the crackdowns after the coup, the economic instability, it drives educated, secular, globalized Turks to leave the country.
And these are the engineers, the doctors, the financiers you need to build that new Turkey.
Exactly. You can have the hardware, the drones, and the bridges, but if you lose the software, the human capital, the project eventually stalls.
So let's pull the lens back. We have a Turkey that is militarily assertive, geographically expansionist, but economically vulnerable. It feels like Erdogan is trying to redraw the map, but the geography itself, the mountains, the seas, the neighbors, they haven't moved. He's still stuck in the same tough neighborhood.
The geography hasn't changed, but the way Turkey navigates it has fundamentally shifted. They are no longer waiting for a green light from Washington or Brussels. They are pushing back. They are creating friction, and that friction is reshaping the region.
So what's the takeaway?
Turkey is now too big to ignore, too strategic to lose, but too independent to be a compliant ally.
It's a standalone power, for better or worse.
It is, and the big question going forward is whether the economy can sustain the ambition. Can you run an independent foreign policy on dependent economics?
That is the big question. Indeed, the map keeps changing.
It certainly does.
And we want to turn that question over to you listening right now. As Turkey asserts its power from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, do you see it as a stabilizing force or new source of regional tension? Let us know your take in the comments. Thanks for diving in with us.